Hey guys, this is Vedika. Today is a very big day. We have a very special guest called Mr. Author. How did I meet him? Hmm, I met him in my house. At first, we were like total strangers, and then randomly we had an intense conversation. When I came to know more about him, I found I could personally relate to him. We both have ADD as a common thing between us, which means attention deficit disorder. However, despite having ADD, he took a different approach or route that resulted in his success. He's a chief of staff working in 8VC. 8VC is a venture capital fund based in Texas, United States. The fund primarily invests in innovative companies, which are scientifically impactful to the world. Arthur is a very inspiring person. Despite having ADD, he's very successful. And FYI, he did his undergrad in Oxford University and is a graduate from Cambridge. This interview will be understanding the approaches that he took despite having ADD as an obstacle. So let's move on. How did you come to know that you were diagnosed with ADD and how old were you?
It's
Like,
actually, it actually, first, like I say, thank you for having me. Um, Actually, it was really late. I was 19. I had done my whole school, um, and in the UK, we have A levels, which are like the exams you do when you're 18 to get into university. And no one had ever pointed this out to me. I knew I had dyslexia, uh, but no one had ever pointed out that I had ADHD or even like hadn't even really crossed my mind. And then I had a really brilliant undergraduate professor in my first year who was just like, you need to go and get tested for ADHD about 3 months into knowing me. And I think that he probably had seen enough people come through that he was able to spot the signs. And I actually was very fortunate because at exactly the same time, my younger brother, Alfie, got diagnosed. And it's very often hereditary. And so it was pretty clear that it was always pretty likely that I would have it. So when I was about like 19, probably halfway through being 19, and it was a really life-changing diagnosis for me in some ways because one, it helped me understand and explain some of the things I'd found very difficult up until that point. And two, it let me then go and find really useful techniques and strategies for dealing with it. And I really think of ADHD as a superpower, but it has to be properly managed, and you have to self knowledge is a really important part of that, which is why the whole diagnostic process is really vital.
Actually, I never knew you had dyslexia. I only thought you had ADD, and plus, I like when I first met you, I thought you were just like a normal person who's very intelligent with a high IQ, and then actually never knew about this.
I don't think it's anything really to do with intelligence. I'm not sure about how intelligent I am, but I think that like the thing about dyslexia and ADHD is they can really be strengths, especially as when you're thinking against or in a different way to other people can be a massive asset. And particularly on teams, it's always good to have a few people who have like really different perspectives. Um, the main thing is just it can be really crippling and difficult if you don't know that you've got it because you're like, oh, why can't I do the thing that everyone else can do? Like, why can't I get stuff done on time? Or why does it take me so long to read? Or whatever it is. But if you understand it and you can put it in context, then I think it can be really valuable.
That's very interesting. So, like sometimes, like I'm really impressed because I actually sometimes used to blame myself because I had ADD, like, and most of the times I like prolong stuff, and
Right.
I just can't believe how you were able to cope with it and how did you make it as a superpower. So that was like a very interesting thing you were talking about.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think part of it is like knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. That's a big component where and not beating yourself up too hard. I mean, the first thing is this is just the thing about the world. Like you're having ADHD is a bit like the sky being blue. there's nothing you can really do about it in a concrete sense, and nor is it really your fault. So the first thing is not beating yourself up for some intrinsic like property, and then coming to understand where your gaps are. So for ADHD people, for example, they talk about like the big five executive functions, which is kind of working memory. I can Google them. Uh, it's it's a it's like working memory, um, attention, organization and planning, those sort of things. And I obviously suck at a lot of those. And so understanding that, being like, okay, this is going to take lots of organizational planning, so I need to allocate more time or whatever. That's a big part of it. And then knowing where your strengths are. So for example, with ADHD, it's very useful for making links between otherwise separate areas. So the thing of getting really distracted or whatever, and oh, I'm reading one article and now I'm reading another, can be really useful. Oh,
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I lost you. Where did we lose each other? We can edit it.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
It's just
Where did we?
I'm
Where
very
did,
very
it
um
doesn't matter to me. Where did I lose you?
like in the part where you were explaining and then suddenly you were just like speaking. I couldn't hear anything. About you were
No worries.
like searching something up on Google, right? That part I
Yeah.
think I lost.
Let's do the next question, and I can answer I can bring in the same set of answers into the next question, and then we can edit it nicely.
Nice. So um how was your life in college? What other activities were you involved in?
I loved college so much. I made a ton of very wonderful friends. Um, I did a bit of debating in my first year. Really, I'd done a lot of debating at school, and continued that a bit. And then I did a lot of drama. I directed a play, um, and COVID happened right in the middle of my undergraduate. So I had most of my second year I was at home with my family and spent a lot of time reading and writing. And then third year was pretty intense. Exams. I'm trying to think whether I think incidentally, like playing sport and doing exercise, one of the sneaky most important things if you have ADHD, that isn't necessarily obvious, but totally transformational. Your focus, clarity, when you have done some exercise in a day. I mean, one of the things I often struggle with is going to bed, because I'll like get into bed and my mind will be like for another hour and a half or whatever. So that's another reason that doing some exercise can be really helpful, because it just tires you out and gets that physical tiredness.
But actually, wait, I also about that, like, how is it easy for you to make friends? For me, it's very hard, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is, well, one, I think it's not supposed to be easy or often to make like really great friends. It's okay that it's sometimes difficult and it takes time. And it's also making friends is itself, I think, a skill that you learn over time. And so by the time I was at university, I think I'd gone through that process enough times of like my family, we'd moved place when I was 10, and then I went to boarding school. And so I'd kind of gone through the process. For much of my time at boarding school, I basically had like 4 or 5 friends. And then at some point, I think one, like there's some great advantage to really be trying to be yourself, and like people actually in the end really respect it when you're not trying to fit in with the group or whatever. And then the other thing is like you don't necessarily need a ton of friends. I think it's very good to just find like your people who you feel like you can vibe with and be yourself with, and like spending time around people who make you feel like the best version of yourself is, I think, more important than how many friends you have or like who your friends are. And I think that's a trap that's like very easy to fall into when you move into a new place or a new like school environment or university environment, where obviously it's completely natural that you want to make loads of friends and feel comfortable. But really the strength of those friendships that you have are what lets, like, it gives you the power to be like, I'm actually not interested. I don't really care if that person likes me or not. And that's like a superpower if you can get that.
Uh, so like you so you like so do some people have ADD and ADHD, or because I thought they were like, because like my mom said that ADD and ADHD are two different things, because the other one is attention deficit disorder, and the other one is hyper attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So I thought those two could be separate because some people
I
are
think
very.
I think they are separate. I mean, there's a long conversation we should have one day about like what pathologizing or like diagnosing a mental like neurodivergence means, because it's a bit weird when you think about it. You and I might both have ADD, but the way that that expresses in me and you is completely different. Like the impact on our lives, how it makes us come across to other people. So there is like an interesting kind of medical and philosophical debate to be had about how useful or what it means to diagnose something like this. For example, ADD is often expressed as very, very different in men and women. So I have loads and loads of friends who are girls who were not diagnosed with ADD or ADHD until they were like 20, 25, because they had learned coping mechanisms very early on that meant that it was much less visible than it often is in boys who, stereotypically are kind of causing trouble in the classroom and getting
Yes,
distracted.
I
And so girls often are much better than boys, like at building coping mechanisms. And I think, in many societies, there's less tolerance for girls having really distractible ADHD traits. And so that's like an example of how the same thing can express very differently in different people. But to directly answer your question, as far as I know, they are slightly different things. The hyperactivity component they're obviously very related, as their similar names suggest. But I think the hyperactivity component is about like this inability to sit still, this restlessness, as well as just
yeah.
as well as just not being able to pay attention.